We're on the south side of Chicago at the headquarters of Operation Push in the office of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And we're speaking to the Reverend George Riddick, Staff Vice President of Operation Push and Special Assistant to the President. First thing I guess I'd like to ask is, just in your reflection 2 years after the death of Mayor Daley, when you think about Mayor Daley, what comes to mind? What are the images and ideas that come to mind, impressions, attitudes about that late Daley?
Well, first of all, he was a remarkable political figure. He was, they said, the last of an old breed of politicians. He liked to say he was the first of a new breed of politicians in that regard, who frequently wanted to give the impression that good politics was good government, you know, and vice versa. It's my impression that Richard Joseph Daley, despite the many problems that we have with the things that he did, was in fact a tremendously incredible political leader. He was considered one of the most outstanding public administrators in the country by Fortune magazine when he was elected, and this is true. There's no doubt about it. He built this city. There's no doubt about that. He really relined and reshaped the landscape of the Chicago Loop. He loved this city, and his commitment to it was certainly one that no one can question. His blind side was a side that grew out of his immersion in ethnic politics, which had essentially divided the pie between the Irish and Germans in the city, and to some extent the Jews, the Italians and the Poles, and was beginning to make some concession to blacks and browns, much less so to browns than blacks, but certainly nowhere near what blacks and browns were entitled to.
I remember that Martin Luther King said after one of those marches that in all of his experience to that point, he had never witnessed and experienced such hatred and hostility as he had in this northern city. I'm wondering, what was Daley's response to Martin Luther King's efforts in the beginning of efforts for the black community to make its needs known?
His response to the efforts in Chicago were negative. They were really negative. I think you could really begin to see the blind side relative to being steeped in ethnic politics. Daley had promised groups of people in areas like Belmont Cragen and Bogan Ashburn and Market Park that they would be virtually quarantined off from blacks. He did that to keep them in the city. He needed their votes. He also needed the tax base that he had. He needed a stable city. He felt that stable city would develop out of a patch quilt of ghettos where you stage manage things very carefully so that people's interests were cared for, you know. Sometimes his perception of what our interest was unfortunate. It grew out of Bridgeport. Again, you know, he grew up in Bridgeport. He was a product of an old-fashioned situation. He belonged to the Hamburg Gang. The Hamburger Gang was one of the most violent of the gangs operating during the 1919 race riot. He grew up with a very narrow conception, you know, of what the world was all about. They had one Jewish member, Abraham Lincoln Moravitz, who became a judge and everything like that. And so you can see where they were. They were Irish, Polish, Lithuanian Catholic, who saw themselves within the focus of territories. And territoriality was Daley's concept of how you ran Chicago and everything like that. Now, we have to give him credit for being a masterful stage manager. He stage managed conflict by reason of being both the head of the Cook County Democratic Party and the head of the city and everything like that, and a tremendously able political boss. he gave a certain stabilization to the political process, you know, that was able to give Chicago some viability. But I don't think he ever realized when that viability was gone for good. What he never recognized, of course, was the festering sores growing in Robert Taylor homes were not in any sense being alleviated. The school system was worsening, both in terms of segregation. It became, during his administration, a 94% index of segregation in the schools. It was worsening in terms of its quality. Chicago United magazine showed that there was a disparity in per capita expenditures of 7% even with the state's equalization formula, resource equalizer funds. There was still a disparity of 7%. And in addition to that, there was evidence that the school system was as much as 20 points behind, the total school system was as much as 20 points behind, and that the racially isolated schools were becoming worse than that. There is a feeling, of course, among the older ethnic stock of whites that blacks are lazy, that they have no motivation, that they're good for nothing. What is always interesting when you hear the story about the comparison of services, you get more services than we do, is that frequently if you add on a numbers one by one game, you might find that in some communities garbage collection may occur more than it does in some Northwest Side communities. What they don't tell you is that garbage collection will occur one and a half times more than this, but the population will be 5.5 times more, you see. And so there's really still a deficit, you know, that we face. The same thing in school services. We were constantly told by a group of mothers who were always appearing at the board, you people have lunchrooms, we don't. Well, we were the ones that had schools with 1,700 and 1,800 children in them, while they had 400 and 500 children in their schools. And we were the ones that didn't have certain equipment in our schools when they had it. Didn't have nursing service. Well, you know, you could just go on down the line. They were always good at nitpicking on services. People like Marzullo and others would prefer us being beggars. And what they repeated to you is the self-fulfilling hoax, you know, and everything like that that grows out of that, which they like to, of course, cover up by saying you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. There are lazy blacks, no doubt about it. There are persons who are criminal in our community. But we are always projected as more criminal, less industrious, and less universal than we are. And that's unfortunate. The media does that. That is unfortunate. We need to be seen within a perspective where, given the opportunities of a first-rate quality education and decision-making which enables our kids to see significant role models that are important in their development, and certain other factors which have traditionally worked in American pluralism but all of a sudden stopped when blacks and browns came. Given those factors put into play, I can assure Marzullo and anyone else that we will stand on our own 2 feet and do as well as any other group has done.